Okay, thank you all. I hope everybody can hear me. This seems to be a little bit of a jinxed spot that I was given. I got a call from Lenny on Friday, I think it was, asking me if I could speak in this spot. My co-presenter, Kirsten Zapiak, turned up a little bit ill this morning. So I'm here doing this by myself. And I noticed that there's sort of a high stage right here with not a lot of room to walk. So if I get too close, somebody catch me, please. Here to talk about the future. I mean, this has been a great conference from many perspectives. Lots of great insights and all that. And clearly the industry is going through a lot of change right now. And if you sort of look at the history of the last couple of years, I think you can describe this a bit as sort of an age of anxiety for market research. Lots of unsureness about the future, where we're headed, but clearly there's a feeling that there's big change in the air. Whoops, top green button, there we go, okay. And part of that is because what's different this time is that even though this is an industry that has endured and prospered with many different changes in methodology and approach over the last 100 years since the industry really started, we're now seeing some real challenges to the basic business model behind market research. You have to go back and really think for the basic reason why this industry started. You can boil it down to a simple reason. Marketers needed information to make decisions, and that information didn't exist. So market research started to gather that information and deliver it to marketers. When you cut it all down to the chase, that's what this industry has been about. It's been about collecting data. And then different companies over different periods of time would do different things with that data. And over time, different skill sets evolved in order to really analyze and really produce that data in a very effective way. And we always thought about single projects. You think about what it is you do, a client calls you up, they got a problem, you go do a single project to try to answer that. But now we live in a world where data are not rare. When you pick the sort of metaphor that's interesting to you, they're all usually about water, whether you're sort of drinking from the fire hose or dipping your hand in the stream. Water is very important, it seems, right now in the market research industry. But we live in a world where data are just clearly not rare anymore. So market research needs to evolve in order to fit this new reality. How do we capitalize on the wealth of data that's available? It's not so much about getting new data, although there's still a role for that, but it's really around how do we use the data that are out there, that river of information. And how can we use that to do a better job to understand why things are happening, and then how can we link that to business performance? And this is where I really think the opportunity is in the next few years. I've been in market research for over 30 years, and I can tell you over that entire time, marketing researchers have whined incessantly about not having a seat at the table. And why haven't we had a seat at the table? Because we don't really, deliver dollars and cents to the organization. We're not saying, a lot of what we do is about filling in scorecards for somebody. And that doesn't deliver bottom line really to companies. So if we can actually do a better job of linking what actions are being taken to real business performance, then the CFO will want to listen to us. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I think that's the big opportunity for us right now. Now, in order to do this, we need different mindsets. Old research is really around asking. It's about how do we, out of the infinite number of questions we could ask, how do we, hone that down to something reasonable? And obviously from the discussion over the last few days, what's reasonable in terms of a survey is now changing. It's gone from 20 minutes to 30 minutes and now back down to 5 questions. But we try to hone it down to a minimum number of questions, and then we do some tried and true kinds of analyses, usually very descriptive, Despite the fact that there are a lot of people out here, some of the people in the room who do some very high-end analytics, the fact of the matter is that 98% of all market research data are analyzed using crosstabs. And it's a simple descriptive analysis of the findings. And that's what old research has really been about. It's about asking. But the new research is not about asking so much. It's about exploring and interrogating data sets that already exist. And what we have to do is find the right data that will answer the business questions out of this, what seems like an infinite variety of sources of information. So we need to address business questions using data that are already out there, and we need to think really about how do we answer questions with data we already have. It's a very different mindset that we're moving towards than the traditional model of market research. And there are different skill sets that are needed then as well. It's not just a mindset change, it's a skill set change. Old research was around collecting data. That's what you learned how to do. Whether you were on the supplier side or you were on the client side, you learned about things like sample design, how to construct a good questionnaire, how to do crosstabs, how to write banner specs. Anybody remember that? I still twitch. But then you would do a descriptive analysis at the end. Those were the skill sets of most market researchers, especially on the quantitative side. And even if you're on the qualitative side, your skill sets were around how to collect qualitative data. New research, the skills is not about how to collect data, but it's how to find the data that's already out there. How do you make connections between the different kinds of information that are out there to build a story to really help address the business questions that are out there? And we'll talk about it in a second, but there are different levels of this that can be done. So whether you're talking about, very, very much triangulation, or you're talking about real data science, there's a lot of new things that can be done. So if we think about the new market research, we need to think about new realities, that the old approaches are not necessarily the right approaches. There are new acknowledgments that we have to make as well. We tend to assume that what people tell us is true, but that assumption is often wrong. And we've heard people talk about this over the last couple of days. And then there's new uses. I think that there's some really exciting possibilities out there that can actually help marketing do an even better job than it's been. We have potentially a broader role than we've had before. Let's turn first to new realities. The old approaches are not necessarily the right ones. I know, in a market research conference, it's amazing how little data we've actually seen over the last couple of days. So for those who are sort of hyperventilating a bit, I thought I'd actually show some data. Yesterday, these data were referenced a bit. This is some work we did at TNS, led by Janne Hofmeyr and his team in South Africa. One of the members of the Kantar family that we're part of is Kantar Retail. They collect tons of actual purchase behavior data over in a lot of countries. And we took some of those people and then we applied some standard questionnaire surveys around attitudes and stuff like that, a lot of the stuff that you would do in a typical tracking study data. And we wanted to see how does the attitudes and awareness and all those standard things we do, how does that actually correlate with actual behavior? And the answer is most of it doesn't correlate very well at all. It is shocking how little correlation there really is between what people say on some key things. If you use purchase intent, for instance, I'm not going to go through all these things, but if you look at purchase intent, there's essentially a zero correlation between purchase intent for established brands, and this is across multiple categories in CPG across multiple countries. So this is not just one case. This is the average across a lot of things. Purchase intent for standard brands essentially correlates zero. Why? Ask it if it doesn't mean anything. Other metrics, like aided awareness, may correlate fairly well at an aggregate level, but not on an individual level. Now, if your goal in life is to fill out a scorecard, that may be okay. But if you're actually trying to understand what drives awareness, if it doesn't correlate well at an individual person level, your driver models are going to be all messed up. So why do we need these metrics? We need to focus on the metrics that really do matter to the extent we're going to continue doing survey research. So we need to be thinking about how to use multiple source data, whether it's big, little, medium-sized, or whatever. I think of it as new data. I'm not going to get into defining what big is. Already seen a lot of that. So the new market research is about taking multiple sources of data. Some of this may require big data platforms, connecting these different things together, and really try to triangulate in on answers to come up with a story. So it's about testing hypotheses. We see one thing out of one data source. Are we seeing something similar that reinforces that's consistent with that in another data source as well? So we try to connect the story, and then we try to get to actionable insights, which in some cases may be more inferential than exact, depending upon how we do it. We need to think about integration from several perspectives. We can think about soft integration, which is just literally just lining up different data sources to the extent we can see how well they tell the same story. Or we can go for more hard integration, which is really about building more predictive models. And we saw yesterday some cases of how it's being used for using lookalike modeling, where we can use lookalike modeling, we can use single source, and we'll show you an example of how we can do both of those. But it's both kinds of integration that we need to start bridging and applying on an everyday basis. So one case of this, one example of how we can use this is by relying on passive listening. We've heard a lot about mobile technologies, listening sorts of things. There's a lot of passive technology that's around that enables us to understand what are people using online, what are they searching for, to what extent they've been exposed to ads. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So new acknowledgments. We can't just assume that what people tell us is true. It's often wrong. Here's a pretty typical case. Here's the reality of most questionnaires. We have an interviewer, or it's a computer, saying, do you remember if you saw this ad? Put some stills in front of them, put a commercial in front of them, and do you remember if you saw this? And you got some person sitting there, I don't know. Did I? Maybe I did. It kind of looks like something I've seen. I don't know. Did I? And he said, well, yes. And we count that as being a measure of exposure. And that's what we tend to rely on in a world where you're dependent upon surveys. By the third time you've asked this, if they realize they said yes, and you've now asked them 10 more questions, they're going to guess no probably, just so they can so you'll stop asking them questions. But you have a lot of guessing that's going on. And we use that to measure exposure right now, because that's all we've had historically. But we can use digital media. We can use some relatively new technology, been around for a few years. By putting tags on digital ads, we can see what people have actually been exposed to. On our panel, people have opted in. If they've been exposed to one of our client ads, we get a ping back that indicates that that person was actually exposed. So we know who's been exposed. We know how many times they've been exposed. We know where they were exposed. So we know real information about what they were exposed to. And then we can group, exposed versus not exposed, and we can see what impact this has had, whether it's had impact on attitudes, and then, we can optimize based on that. Where we're moving to, though, is actually linking behavioral data to that. We can look at, that same technology. We can look at who's actually been exposed to an ad, and by, again, partnering with Kantar Retail, we can actually see what actual purchase effects there have been. We don't have to ask about it. It's purely observational that we can now do. So we can see to what extent exposure to an ad drives actual behavior. And you can do things like this. This is an example of this. In pre-campaign to post-campaign, those who were not exposed to the ad, their purchase actually went down. Those who were exposed to the ad, their purchasing actually went up. There's a 16% lift in actual purchase behavior. Real ROI measurement. This is how you get the attention of management, when you can say things like this. We can do all this now without actually asking anybody anything. And if we want to survey them, we can survey them to understand what's really important. So we can actually now move on. The latest developments in this is to go beyond the online. We can put apps on to mobile to see what they've been exposed to, and we've been testing an app that actually will listen to what somebody is watching on TV. And using that same, in effect, kind of watermark on an ad, that app can listen and hear what somebody has actually been exposed to. So now, that same precision we can get out of online, we can now apply towards TV as well. So we're not just relying on what people said they've been exposed to, we can actually now do it based on what they've actually been exposed to. And then through using a single source panel, we can actually find out what's actually the impact of all this. Now, what we find when we see this is that when you when you ask whether they've recognized the ad, we've actually been able to establish that those who are exposed and those not exposed have the same rate of saying that they can recognize the ad. So we can demonstrate something that we've always been afraid of. Depending upon, traditional recognition is leading to a lot of error. And it's actually, in some cases, overstating the impact of exposure. Because we know that people with high affinity to a brand tend to say that they remember seeing that ad. So new uses, because I'm running out of time. This is actually, I think, a very fruitful area. We can actually move to areas where market research has not been able to play. Using a very brief questionnaire, we can establish who an opportunity group for a brand might be, who has more affinity for it than their purchasing currently would seem to support. So there's an opportunity there. And then using some of that same lookalike modeling that was discussed in the presentation yesterday, we can build lookalike models, we can identify who they are, we can track what their internet behavior is, what their purchase behavior is, build lookalike models, so in the broader world out there, we can now use that as a seed for lookalike models and find millions of people who are like those people who are the opportunity group. That's a huge opportunity for market research. Take those models that was discussed yesterday, we can make them better and more accurate. So it's a whole new use for market research information. And just one quick example. If, let's say your growth target you were looking for, if you were just sending it out at random, you get 20% based on all the consumers exposed. But using this methodology, we can actually get a much higher percentage of those who you really want with many fewer exposures. So you can make your campaigns a lot more efficient than they could have been before, saving a lot of money or spending the money to reach more people who you really want to reach. So, just in sum up, there are new realities that we have to deal with, there are new acknowledgments that we need to make, and there are very exciting new uses that we can put to market research in ways we couldn't do before. And I just want to end, because I'm out of time, with a quote that a friend of mine, Mark Truss, who's the Global Director of Business Intelligence at JWT, used at a conference that we co-led a panel at the ARF conference this past spring. I started the session off with a quote from Max Planck, the physicist. Mark's a different kind of guy, and he ended it with a quote from Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. Somebody has to do something. It's just incredibly pathetic that it has to be us. There is nobody out there who's going to save us. We have to do it ourselves. I realized, as I said, this is an age of anxiety for market research, but it's a great age of opportunity as well. And for those willing to embrace that future, there's a bright future ahead of us. Thank you, and I look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Larry. Well, we've got time for, we're going to take two quick questions. So
Larry, great presentation. And I read your Green Book blog last night. That was great as well. It was good prep for today.
Thank you.
So my question is, the growth segment, the last example that you use, why do you suppose surveying them is more effective than surveying other folks on other topics?
No, you use a survey. You can identify segments in a survey, and a lot of times when you do that kind of segmentation, it sits on a shelf and everybody sits there and wonders, how can I find these people?
So it's the behavior aspect that follows.
Now we can actually find those people and make those kind of look-alike models that are now used for digital campaigns. We can make them more effective. I'm assuming you want to advertise to people who are good prospects. just a crazy assumption on my part.
First of all, I love the Jerry Garcia quote. I don't know if I'll put it up for inspiration and back in the office, but it's still great. If you look up like market research, the definition in Wikipedia, it basically it just says it's to support the marketing function, no more, no less. How do you see
No,
that?
that's pretty depressing.
How do you, to your last point then about expanding beyond that, how do you see the boundaries of our industry moving forward?
Okay, well, that's worthy of a presentation by itself. It's all going to shift. I mean, a lot of the work that we've done that just sort of fills in somebody's spreadsheet is going to decrease. And certainly the type of work that we're doing, what market research is, yeah, in some sense it still is going to support marketing decision making. That is why we're here. But it's not on the basis of the fact that data doesn't, and we go collect the data. It's all these other mindsets and skill sets that are going to become the norm for market research. And we just heard the last presentation about all that kind of investment that's coming in, whether it's market research as us or it's market research as analytics, the data scientists, all those sorts of skills and different ways of approaching it, that's becoming the new market research. And if you can't adapt to that world, you may well be out of the industry. I mean, it's kind of that cold and that cruel, the kind of change that we're seeing.
Thanks very much, sir.
Okay.